Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It's great to see you. Stan, whatever you're making in the fridge, save some for me. I love when I can see people's full rooms and what they're doing over there. So it is great to see you all today, and we're so happy you're here. And I think last week we did the psychology of humor, if I recall correctly. So we're going from humor to grief because the mind is complicated. We do all of it all at once. What I like to call the totality of emotions. Actually, one of the great insights of Judaism, I believe, is that we don't just bracket emotions and say, here's a happy time and here's a sad time. And it's all mixed together, just like breaking the glass at the chuppah, represents, just like having family or company in your home during Shiva, right? You have the joy of Shiva while you're mourning. You have the sadness of breaking a glass while you're celebrating. So grief is uplifting as well. So I want to dedicate this learning to my mother today, who passed away just about 2 years ago, who is my teacher of life, my teacher of death, my teacher of grief and mourning. And today is learning in the memory of Sandy Yanklowitz. May her memory be a blessing. So we are going to start with the text, but before we start with the text, let's start with a poll question. I have found grieving most comforting in isolation, just with family, mostly in community. I'm sure we have all grieved to one degree or another, maybe many times. What did you find most comforting? Isolation, just family, mostly in community. Oh, wow. Okay, nobody said alone. 25% said just with family, and 75% said mostly in community. Very interesting. And I'm sure many of us felt pulled between those various options. Okay, so as I like to do now, I want to study a text inside before we go to the presentation at large. This is really not about family grieving at all, but it's about collective national grieving. And it's a Gemara in Makot that says, it's actually a famous one, but I always feel bad when I say famous because then someone feels bad if they haven't seen it before. So let's not call it famous. Let's just say it's one that I've seen before. The Gemara relates an incident regarding Chazal, the sages. On an occasion, they were ascending to Jerusalem. They're going up to Jerusalem after the Churban, after the destruction, right? The second temple here is destroyed in the year 70, and they're now going up to that spot to look at it because they haven't seen what Rome did. They arrive at Mount Scopus, right? We all know Mount Scopus. So I shouldn't say we all. Some of us have been to Mount Scopus, and they saw the site of the temple, and they tear their garments, right? Just as one tears their garments at a funeral. I mean, these days the Reformed community just uses ribbons, but traditionally we tear our shirt or a coat. And many people who go to the Kotel today still do that. In any case, back then, they did it back then as well. They tore their garments. When they arrived at Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, always a politically contentious issue, who can go up there, who should go up there, they saw a fox that emerged from the Holy of Holies, and most of the rabbis started to cry, right? There's this holy place. Now there's just a fox walking on this holy place that Rome destroyed. But Rabbi Akiva laughs. They said to him, "What's going on? Why are you laughing?" And Rabbi Akiva says to them, "What's the matter with you? Why are you crying?" Okay, so I want to stop there. I don't even want to get into the rest of the text, although it's all interesting. But what do you think is going on there? What do you think is going on with this issue? Like, this is like, friends, think about, maybe you had a Holocaust survivor parent or aunt or uncle. Think about them in 1946. Forget even 1960 when they still weren't talking about it until Elie Wiesel wrote Night and until other people started talking. Most survivors never. There was two types of survivors: those who never talked about it and those who wouldn't stop talking about it. Right? And so what am I talking about? Oh yeah. So now it's the year 70, 71. This is the Holocaust, right? Everything they know is destroyed. Maybe it's worse than the Holocaust. I mean, it's hard to compare these things, right? But this was the central institution. It's not like many different institutions destroyed. There was one institution and it's destroyed. Exile, everything is broken. Everything is defiled. And now they're looking. It'd be like showing up at a concentration camp, or like the concentration camp, right? And you crying versus laughing. All right, so what do you think is going on here? Thoughts? And Lauren, even though you know the rest of the Gemara, you can feel free to weigh in.
If I could say something,
yeah.
We're grieving to this day, right? I mean, that's why we step on a glass, and
right.
you're right, and why you're not supposed to paint your entire house. And really, if you look at every calamity that has happened to us, it's because we lost our sovereignty. So I think that, I mean, I know the ending, so I know why Rabbi Akiva is laughing, but I certainly relate to the rabbis who were crying. Even if they had any nevuah, I mean, then they could see the terrible things that are going to be for the Jews in Galut. So, and it is fulfilling a prophecy.
Do you want to say a word since we're not going to go through the whole Gemara? Do you want to say a word about why he's laughing?
Sure. So he says this because this was prophesied that they would lose the temple, that would be destroyed, but so is the coming of Mashiach. So he's laughing because he's saying, yeah, it's happened. It's the prophecy came true, but so will the prophecy of Mashiach coming and getting our sovereignty again.
Okay,
so that's
great.
why
Thank
he's
you.
laughing.
So yes, thank you. So there's these verses in Uriah and Zechariah, and as one prophecy comes true, it makes it more true that the next one will come true as well. So there's a laughing and the grieving of just like the realization of truth. And I would say, like, in my own mourning experience, I wouldn't call it laughing, but I would call it like a deep, meaningful experience of connection with what's true in the world, right? And for some people, mourning is purely sad, and for others, there's like a reflective, connective experience that can be uplifting. Okay, anyone else want to weigh in on this text? Yes, Gary.
Well, I was thinking exactly what you were, that the loss of my parents and my in-laws and other friends, that the reflection of their life and a reflection of your own life moving forward can be sad and funny at the same time, or a realization of reality, of change, and the humor of just reflecting on what has happened in the past and where we're going into the future.
Nice. Okay, very nice. All right. So if you have other thoughts, please hold them, and we're going to plow forward now. But I'm glad we could start with that a little something inside the text. So there's an indigenous wisdom book that says grieving is a sign of spiritual health. Today, we're going to dive into the multifaceted psychology of grief, exploring its dimensions, disentangling misperceptions, ultimately demonstrating how Jewish mourning practices offer a remarkably sophisticated and compassionate framework for engaging with loss. It's my hope that by understanding grief more comprehensively, we not only navigate our own sorrows with greater wisdom, but also offer more authentic and compassionate support to others on the journey. In the shared human journey, there's few experiences as universally profound, yet deeply personal as grief. Of course, different for all of us. It's a terrain we will be called to navigate, whether through the immediate shock of death or the quiet ache of other significant losses. As someone involved in this type of spiritual work who has assisted others in the loss of their loved ones, I've spent decades grappling with this paradox and what emerges from this inquiry of a profound truth, mostly that grief is not a destructive force to be overcome, but a transformative process of learning that literally changes our brains and souls. It's, as some have put it, the price we pay for love, and indeed a reflection of love itself. The ability to understand grief begins with acknowledging how vast and varied it can be. It's not just a feeling, it's a layered, intricate process that emerges when a person loses someone or something that is deeply connected, right? As a reminder, we can grieve beyond just human death. Though we often think of a grief in emotional terms, it also displays itself in our bodies, right? A lot of studies now show how grief can be held in the body. Our thoughts, our behaviors, our relationships, and even in how we view the world. It's comprehensive. At this early point in our conversation today, it's helpful to draw a distinction. Bereavement is the fact of having lost, while grief is the personal, often unpredictable response to that loss. When we lose someone precious, our entire being responds in profound and interconnected ways that touch every aspect of our existence. In the emotional realm, we experience a wide array of feelings that can seem overwhelming and contradictory. These emotions include anger, guilt, profound sadness, anxiety, loneliness. Surprisingly, relief or shock can also be present, especially immediately after a death. There's an intense yearning for what was, a desperate wish to return to a time before the loss occurred. I want to remind us of something that ought to be obvious. Although we're talking about universal phenomena, this is so different for all of us. It's different, if you lose a parent versus a spouse versus a child. Many people losing a dog is not a big deal. Other people, a dog or cat passing is a huge deal, right? And or even the grieving of October 7th, or political grieving for a country we thought we lived in. These things are profound. As Dr. Susan Delaney, a contemporary thinker and the clinical psychologist, notes, grief is messy, and we feel a myriad of emotions, perhaps even all on the same day. From a neurological standpoint, grief initiates a cascade of changes in the brain that can significantly alter cognitive function. Individuals often report trouble concentrating, persistent mental fog, or a tendency to ruminate, all of which reflect disruptions in neural processing. These effects are not just emotional, they're rooted in biology. Grief activates the brain's responses to stress, releasing cortisol and other hormones that interfere with regions like the hippocampus, which plays a critical role in forming and retrieving memories. As a result, our recollections may feel distorted and unreliable. We try to remember things about a person. Sometimes we get a one-sided picture of the trauma or a one-sided picture of the joy. Not because we're weak, but because the grieving brain is quite literally overwhelmed. Our bodies bear the weight of grief in tangible ways. Mourners can become exhausted, experience changes in appetite, feel tension in their muscles. The body remains flooded with cortisol, a stress hormone, which can cause the immune system to falter, making us vulnerable to illness. This is why some bereaved spouses may fall ill shortly after their partner dies. And to be sure, grief transforms how we move through the world through behavioral changes. We may withdraw from certain relationships or avoid places that remind us of our loss. Disrupted sleep patterns and crying at unexpected moments can be common. These responses are not signs of weakness or pathology. They're natural expressions of a psyche learning to navigate a fundamentally altered reality. One of the most profound insights emerging from contemporary neuroscience is that grieving fundamentally changes our brains. By the way, I don't know if this is true, but most of the scholars I found on grieving were women, not men. And it's interesting, in the study of psychology, some psychology fields I find are dominated by men, certain psychological phenomena, and others are dominated by women, and I find that really interesting. Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, a leading researcher in the field based at the University of Arizona, observes that grieving can be thought of as a form of learning. This isn't metaphorical. It's a literal process that rewires our neural pathways, like learning. When we form close attachments, our brain encodes these bonds. As Dr. O'Connor explains, the brain essentially creates a we rather than just a you and a me, but an overlapping experience. Therefore, when a loved one is no longer physically present, we experience it as if part of us goes missing. This isn't merely a metaphor. At a neural level, our representation of this we has a hole in it. There's a hole in the sense of self because of that we that has been disrupted. This understanding manifests in several interconnected ways that reshape our entire approach to living. At the most fundamental level, we must adapt to absence by figuring out, how do I live in the world now? This includes major life adjustments, like learning to retire without a spouse who was meant to share that retirement journey with us. These larger adaptations require us to reimagine our future and redefine our sense of purpose and direction. Some people didn't plan to live next to their adult child until their spouse passed away, so they moved next to that adult child or with that adult child. Even at a modest level, we must change countless daily habits and predictions that were woven into the fabric of a relationship with the person we've lost. This includes the poignant experience of reaching for the phone to call them, only to realize they're gone. These micro adjustments accumulate into a complete restructuring of how we move through each day. For decades, the general understanding of grief was heavily influenced by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages. She wrote about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. In case you're not familiar with that, I said that fast, so I'll say it again. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Introduced by S in her groundbreaking 1969 book on death and dying, the model was originally based on Dr. Kubler-Ross's work with terminally ill patients, rather people mourning a death. While Dr. Kubler-Ross's work was revolutionary in normalizing conversations about death and dying, sometimes we forget, like, conversations that are so normal these days that weren't normal only decades ago, right? Things you just didn't talk about, like people who didn't talk about death either because they were concerned it was a superstitious, it would bring about death. Maybe you had a parent or a grandparent from Europe who thought if you talk about the bad, it brings the bad, or things like this. Or other reasons that, people were so afraid they didn't talk about certain things. It's crucial to understand why these stages were derived from observing terminally ill patients and were later applied to bereaved individuals. They serve as a helpful description of emotions one might experience, but not a rigid recipe for how one should grieve. Something that's important to realize is that not everyone experiences the stages of grief in a linear way. People move through these experiences and stages in different orders. They return to earlier stages or experience multiple stages simultaneously. Research shows that while yearning may decline and acceptance may increase over time, this doesn't happen in a stair-step fashion. Anniversaries or holidays, for instance, can trigger a resurgence of grief, which is entirely normal and doesn't mean one's grieving trajectory is quote-unquote wrong. As Delaney aptly puts it, it's more like a journey on a long train ride without an end point, where you accommodate to the loss rather than getting over it. It's vital to understand that while grief can feel profoundly sad and may include depressive episodes, grief and clinical depression are fundamentally different phenomena. Misinterpreting normal grieving behaviors as symptoms of a psychiatric condition can be harmful. As Dr. O'Connor explains, quote, the heart of grieving really is around yearning, a longing for the person or the way things were before. She goes on to elucidate this. We know now from both diagnostic clinical science, but also brain imaging work, that grief and depression are not the same thing. We can have both grief and we can have depression, just in the same way you can have depression and anxiety. Say, for example, but you can have one without the other. In depression, the feelings are usually more global. Grieving really focuses on that loved one, right? Depression affects everything. whereas grieving affects sometimes just pieces. It's really about, I need this person back. I can't make it without this person with me. And so it's a slightly different experience. While the brain on grief does show changes like an overactive fear center and an unregulated emotional regulation, leading to feelings of stress and despair, these are distinct from the widespread changes seen in depression, affecting areas in the brain that regulate sleep, mood, and stress hormones. The goal of healthy grieving is integration, not isolation. Of note is that grief is not relegated solely to the human experience. Asian elephants. I'm thinking a lot about this recently with the passing of Jane Goodall, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable the things we didn't know before Jane Goodall. For example, something that's so obvious today, like to understand animals, you have to observe them. And to observe them, you have to build trust with them. And to build trust with them takes a lot of time. So we thought chimpanzees were something from a distance. We had no clue what they were like until Jane Goodall built trust and got close enough to actually study them, right? I mean, now we have all kinds of cameras and satellites and ways to watch them without getting close. But anyways, Asian elephants demonstrate complex bereavement behaviors that challenge anthropocentric assumptions about emotional sophistication. Ethological observations document herds transporting deceased calves to irrigation systems and interring them beneath arranged sediment, behavior resembling deliberate burial practices. In Kenya's Samburu Reserve, multiple elephant families conducted a sustained vigil around the deceased matriarch, Eleanor, engaging in tactile examination through trunk contact and repeated visitations across multiple days. I mean, it's astounding. These behaviors suggest thantological cognition, recognition of mortality that transcends biological imperatives and enters emotional processing realms. Elephants' sustained attention to their deceased and collective presence during dying processes indicates sophisticated death awareness rivaling human bereavement patterns. One of the most compelling examples of animal grief occurred in 2018 when, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Tahalekwa, also known in the scientific community as J35, became a symbol of mourning in the wild. After her newborn calf died just minutes after the birth in the Salish Sea, Talekwa carried the calf's corpse on her head, preserving through strong currents and diving to retrieve it when it slipped away. She continued this heartbreaking vigil for 17 days, covering over 1,000 miles before finally letting the body go. Animal behavior experts, including Professor Barbara King, believe that grief is a fitting description for this incredible act. Talekwa's prolonged, visible displays of mourning clearly show an emotional depth and attachment. King remarked of this case, quote, "I believe that grief is the right word to use for numerous animals who mourn the dead. They may be friends or mates or relatives. These behavioral cues tell us something about an animal's emotional state." Such a cross-species prevalence of extended grief responses indicates these behaviors serve crucial functions, reinforcing group cohesion, transmitting environmental information, and facilitating emotional processing necessary for continued social functioning. But what does animal grief reflect for humanity? Humans uniquely transform mourning from biological response into symbolic architecture through, quote, ritualization, or elevating natural behaviors into culturally encoded practices. This transformation requires forms of temporal consciousness for anticipatory grief, symbolic thinking that injects actions with transcendent meaning, and linguistic capacity, enabling narrative frameworks for understanding loss. Human grief rituals create bonds with the deceased through symbolic interaction, facilitating meaning reconstruction where bereaved individuals rebuild coherent life narratives, incorporating loss while maintaining psychological continuity. These communal practices transform individual grief into collective experience, providing emotional resources and normative frameworks that enhance both individual resilience and group cohesion. More distinctly, humans comprehend death as an existential challenge that calls into question fundamental assumptions about meaning and purpose. Through ritual and narrative, human beings construct their culturally transmitted understanding about living meaningfully despite universal mortality. The process transforms personal sorrow into collective insight, individual loss into communal understanding, and biological termination into spiritual transcendence. So while many species share fundamental grief capacity, humans alone transform mourning into sacred narratives that bridge biological response and cultural creation, temporal loss and transcendent meaning. And for approximately 10 to 20% of those who experience significant loss, grief can become, quote, complicated grief, now often referred to as prolonged grief disorder. This refers particularly to feelings of loss that are debilitating and don't improve even after time passes. It's not a made-up phenomenon. It's a specific complicated grief reaction that falls outside typical cultural and religious norms. Right? Remember, 10 to 20%. Hallmarks of complicated grief include ceaseless longing for those who passed, constant and unwelcome thoughts about the individual, feelings of guilt or the belief that one could have stopped the death, a struggle to participate in life meaningfully, no feeling that life could even bring happiness again. Now, sometimes we're surprised that someone's spouse has passed away and the person gets remarried a year later. Sometimes we're surprised that it's 25 years later and they haven't got remarried, right? That doesn't always indicate how much they cared about their spouse, right? Part of it has to do with how one grieves. Yes, it may have to do with how much they love their spouse, but it may not at all. Individuals may be stuck in their sorrow for years, leading lives of silent despair as if their own existence ceased the moment the other person died. It's crucial to understand that complicated grief is not a sign that someone isn't trying hard enough or is milking it, to put it crudely, for sympathy. Instead, think of it like a broken bone that develops complications, such as an infection or a secondary break. Gary's laughing over there. That prevent natural healing. In such cases, intervention is needed to get the bone back on its healing trajectory. When Gary speaks, he'll talk about if all bones heal similarly or not. Similarly, with complicated grief, the grief journey has been derailed, and specialized therapeutic interventions are often necessary. These interventions are not designed to stop someone from grieving, but to build new skills that allow them to move forward and regain a meaningful life. This might involve exposure therapy to process traumatic memories, develop emotional regulation skills, fostering acceptance and encouraging engagement in new experiences to help the brain learn a new reality. Okay, so you might say, come on, where's the Torah? Okay, well, I'm of the belief that it's all Torah. It's all Torah, but now I'm going to move to what we call Torah. Jewish tradition provides exceptionally advanced psychological frameworks for dealing with grief. And in fact, I hear it said often that this is the wisest of Jewish traditions, right? The mourning. I don't mean this in a way to put anyone down because we're all different, but I really do often feel bad for Jews who don't participate in Jewish mourning processes, even if they only take part of it. Those who run away from the whole thing, because I really think it is a gift, or can be a gift. Anyways, with respect both the commonality of loss and the individual requirements of those who mourn, this carefully ritualized structure stands in stark contrast to the often hyper-individualistic and medicalized approach to death in modern Western culture, which frequently views grief as a problem to be resolved quickly so that people can get back to the grind, move on and get back to it. Judaism doesn't seek to deny grief or death, but rather to confront its reality with simplicity and realism. It's very common in non-Jewish circles to say immediately, I want to celebrate the person's life rather than mourn their loss, right? Whereas, okay, there might be a time and place for celebrating life, right? But to throw off mourning or grieving, as we'll discuss, can lead to other problems. Well, in the U.S., quote, death is primarily understood through the language and concepts of medicine, which focus on treatment, recovery, and cure. Jewish mourning practices offer a profound moral roadmap for navigating loss, recognizing that grief is not a capitalistic problem to be solved, but a sacred journey to be honored. This ancient wisdom unfolds through carefully structured stages that acknowledges both the devastating reality of death and the imperative to continue living. Telling, quote, the rabbis of the Talmud did not begin with the idea of a self who disappears at the moment of death. They held instead that despite the body's demise, the essential person housed in the body still enjoyed some beyond the grave existence, so that proper burial and continued respect for the deceased were required. Now, for those who aren't interested in the notion of afterlife, even many scientists and neuroscientists these days are talking about the unprovability of the end of consciousness following the death of the body. That's taken very seriously, that consciousness transcends bodily life. Likewise, Jewish burial practices stand as a powerful counterpoint to modern funeral customs that often deny the substantive nature of death. Where contemporary American rituals employ viewing the body, cosmetics, elaborate coffins, and artificial carpeting to hide raw earth, Jewish tradition embraces stark realism and simplicity. If a family finds comfort in the litany I just laid out, then I believe there's nothing wrong with it. I don't want to put down anybody in the way they want to mourn. If they want to view a body, I myself, on the Catholic side of my family, viewed bodies, so I have a mixed relationship to it. I'm sure many of us have been to wakes. The Jewish approach, however, serves multiple psychological purposes, preventing mourners from being cheated of valuable grief, work that comes only through facing truth directly. Indeed, it's the straightforwardness that transcends mere philosophy and enters the realm of practical wisdom. By the way, I haven't heard. I wonder if these bodies being returned by Hamas and by Egypt, I wonder if the families are viewing these bodies, if they're choosing to, or if it's only the identification teams, whatever you call the teams that identify. Simple, unemblemished coffins discourage unnecessary spending that frequently conceals guilt regarding how the deceased was treated in life or serves as a shield against feelings or neglect. These conflicting emotions demand sincere reflection instead of costly avoidance, as unaddressed sorrow can later reveal itself through severe physical ailments. By the way, a lot of Gentiles don't understand why Jews want the bodies back. They're like, what's the big deal? Like, the person's dead. What do you need the body for? Like, it's so obvious to Jews why Jews want the bodies back from Hamas. But a lot of other people can't understand it. Like, what? You're going to make a big deal about the bodies? Who cares about the body? Jewish mourning practices center around two essential intertwined goals: honoring the life of the deceased, this is called kavod hamet, and bringing comfort to the bereaved, nichum avelim. Crucially, this comfort is not about feeling good or avoiding pain, right? When you visit the sick person, you might, juggle some balls to make them feel good, but you don't do that at Shiva, right? You're not being a comedian at Shiva, right? But about leaning into the grieving process with communal support and sacred structure, right? So often at a Shiva or a funeral, I'll mention these two goals: nichum avelim and kavod hamet. We're here for two reasons: to honor the dead and to comfort the bereaved. Some people only focus on one of the two, but we have to focus on both. Kavod hamet, nichum avelim. The journey begins with aninut, right? We are Jewish tradition. I don't want to state this as a rule, again, because many of us relate to rules differently. But technically, from tradition, it is prohibited to try to comfort someone before burial. People forget this. They start offering words of comfort and gestures of comfort. We're supposed to traditionally wait until burial to do that. You're supposed to help with logistics prior, but don't offer comfort until burial. There's aninut and avelut. The journey begins with aninut, the immediate period between death and burial. Jewish law demands swift burial arrangements, honoring the ancient belief that leaving the dead uninterred brings great dishonor. This urgency serves as a profound psychological purpose. Making funeral plans provides necessary activity for the mourner at the beginning of grief, affirming their own aliveness even as they confront death. During this time, the onain, they're called the onain, the mourner in this stage, is released from positive religious commandments, creating sacred space devoted entirely to burial preparations. As you know, it can be very overwhelming. This wisdom recognizes that immediate grief requires its own sanctuary, free from competing demands. Perhaps most striking is Kriya, the ritual tearing of garments before the funeral service. This tangible act provides psychological grief, allowing mourners to give vent to pent-up anger and anguish through controlled, religiously sanctioned destruction. Right? I love this idea, by the way, the desire to destroy stuff and break stuff, giving space for that, like the breaking of the glass or the tearing of garments, like give space to break something in a non-destructive way while giving a space for that as well. The symbolism is clear. Quote, Judaism opposes repression of the emotions and enjoins the mourner to express their grief and sorrow openly. The torn garments may never be fully mended, leaving an external scar that mirrors the internal healing wound, serving as a constant reminder even as life slowly resumes. At the cemetery, the practice of mourners actually shoveling earth themselves provides, quote, one last act of love and concern. As many say, it's like putting a blanket upon, for the last time, putting a blanket upon the person when you shovel the dirt. A profound familial act of putting their loved one to rest. This hands-on participation meets a deep psychological need, as evidenced by mourners who tear shovels from cemetery workers' hands to complete the burial themselves. Actually, technically, you're supposed to put the shovel down, not pass it. Throughout the funeral, Judaism opposes emotional repression and enjoins open expression of grief. The eulogy's traditional framework is to awaken tears. The Kel Male Rachamim prayer, heard with the deceased name for the first time, brings a heart-rending newness to the mourner, or the first Yizkor. The Kaddish unites mourners in collective sorrow, transforming individual pain into shared sacred experience. Many people experience Kaddish as a burden, and many people love the opportunity for Kaddish on many levels. After burial, Shiva begins, 7 days of formalized mourning that creates a protective cocoon for the immediate family. This ancient practice, referred in Genesis and codified in the Talmud, provides structure during the most disorienting period of grief, while gently leading mourners back towards life. Shiva unfolds in the home of the deceased or immediate family member, emphasizing family togetherness during profound vulnerability. Unfortunately, sometimes there's multiple Shiva houses because of alienation in families, but sometimes that makes sense as well, or because of locations. And people want to be with and it's hard. Do you want to be with your family or community? Let's say somebody lives in Israel or New York and you live in Arizona, right? Do you want to be with your family member, but then your community is not there? Or do you separate from your sibling when you mourn your parents because you want to be with your community, not with your sibling, right? There's no right or wrong answers, of course. The rituals create a distinctive sacred space. Hand washing before entering cleanses from contact with death. A 7-day Shiva candle symbolizes the deceased soul and God's presence. Low stools or boxes distinguish this week of sorrow from everyday life, echoing Job's grief and King David's mourning postures. The practice of covering mirrors reflects sensitivity to human reality, as mourners don't typically leave home, shave, or use makeup. This practice removes any cause for embarrassment about appearance, implicitly conveying that such concerns don't matter during grief's sacred time. Right? Again, no blame on people who do want to, appear a certain way during this time period. The practice of condolence calls transforms mourning from isolation into shared experience. Visitors enter quietly without knocking, waiting for mourners to speak. Right? This is a beautiful thing in the traditional world that liberal circles don't often embrace, but I think is really powerful. Not directly approaching the person, but waiting to kind of be called over, just letting them sit alone. And if they approach you or if they call you over, then joining them. And focusing on listening rather than offering platitudes. A simple, I'm sorry, a touch or hug means more than elaborate words. We don't have to prepare a speech. These brief visits, even just 30 minutes, provide ongoing presence without overwhelming the grieving family. The Seudat Havra'ah, the first meal after burial provided by friends, helps mourners begin accepting life again. Food carries symbolic weight. Traditionally, lentils and hard-boiled eggs symbolize life and hope. Bread represents life's staff, and moderate wine or liquor provides comfort without avoiding grief. Okay, it's more to say about that, but friends continuing to bring foods throughout Shiva perform an act of great caring, freeing the family from everyday concerns. However, sometimes, to be honest, the third week food is going to be much more helpful than the first week food if they're slammed with food, especially if it's a 90-year-old woman who doesn't eat very much. She probably doesn't need 20 platters, right? Certainly not in the first 3 days. Daily Shiva minyan services allow mourners to recite Kaddish while providing structured time for publicly sharing memories, weaving individual grief into community support. From there, Shloshim extends mourning to 30 days total, acknowledging that grief continues beyond Shiva, but begins integrating with other life aspects, becoming less acute. For parents, Avelut extends mourning to a full year, recognizing that certain losses require extended sacred time. Okay, friends, I have multiple pages more I prepared to share about some Jewish ideas on this, but I always want to leave ample time for conversation. So I'm actually going to pause there and pause what I was going to share here, because I'd love to hear from you. Questions, thoughts, reflections on various aspects of grieving and mourning, whether it's personal or intellectual or traditional. So yes, Lauren, let's start with you, please.
I really found that Shiva and saying Kaddish, and even yearly, saying Kaddish on the Yortzeit, and it really helps. But a pet, like my cat, who I dearly love, is like my soul cat, is dying of cancer. She's got palliation right now, and probably by next week I'll have to take her in and end her life. And I wish I could sit Shiva for the cat. I wish that there was some kind of ritual I could do, because I live alone with her. She's my companion. I don't know. Is there anything within Judaism of officially mourning the loss of a pet?
Thanks, Lauren, for asking. And I actually do get a lot of calls and questions about this. Although I'm not someone who recommends Kaddish for such things, although I know some liberal rabbis who do, I also wouldn't discourage somebody who found that to feel appropriate for themselves. Again, someone might feel, offended in the shul that someone's saying Kaddish for their cat and they're saying it for their mother, right? But I think by and large, there's really no prohibition on reciting Kaddish in any case. Anyone can recite Kaddish, and so there's that. There's also no problem with burying. And there's certainly nothing wrong with taking the wisdom of Jewish mourning practices and applying it as such. So I do really think that the practices there are there as a gift for someone in that journey. And if someone is experiencing psychological grief and they can tap into that, I don't see any reason to prevent that. So thank you, Lauren, for that. And people who have never had a really deep attachment with an animal, it's really hard for them to understand those who have had that on a profound level. So thank you, Lauren. Yes. Yeah. Hi, Mara.
Good morning, everybody. Lauren, you just inspired me to share something that Rabbi said to me. I had my cat Spock he was 19 when he died, so almost made it to 20. And something that a rabbi said to me was, what a gift and blessing it is that we can, end their suffering in a compassionate way where they can be held by you, that's just like something that custom can separate us. Also, just to share that I too was astounded by my grief when my cat died. 19 beautiful years. I thought I would be joyful and grateful and like this is the way it should be, but I woke up and cried my face off for weeks, and it was very astounding. So I feel for you.
Thank you. And of course we should think about children differently as well. We were away on a trip 2 summers ago, and our beloved dog died in the Arizona heat. by the family member who was watching him, and he wasn't even out there so long. And this was a very intense experience for our kids in different ways. There's that piece as well. How do we talk about death and dying of pets with kids? And there's some good books out there about that. Hi, Janie. Let's go to a Janie.
Hi, I just want to bring up maybe a controversial thought that I had, but it's actually what I've believed for a long time. That grief is really negative egocentricity. Because when we go through grief, it's, oh, my life is different. I've had a loss. I don't have this anymore. I have to adjust. But as you said, after that period of negative egocentricity, there's that we need to rebuild as a form of learning. So what did that relationship that I lost, what impact did that have on me? How did I grow with that? How did I increase my capacity for love through that? That to me is the form of learning or the rebuilding. You spoke of complicated grief. That to me is super egotistical. You're denying the joy that relationship brought, and you are just dwelling in the negative impact on yourself. And the words of comfort that we usually have, they don't support that complicated grief. They don't say, oh, I'm so sorry you have to rebuild. I'm so sorry you've lost this. It's always words of comfort that make us feel better or remember the joy or celebration of that life. I really liked something that you said toward the end, listening rather than platitudes. And I think that requires a sensitivity of the person who's talking to the grieving one to their needs. What do they need to hear at this point? So that we're not just saying what everybody else would say or send a sympathy card, but by listening carefully to that person, what does that person need to rebuild, to learn, and to come to the joy of that relationship?
So, Janie, thank you for sharing. I know you're very aligned with Buddhist theology. I assume what you're drawing on here is based on this ideas of attachment and ego attachment as it relates to mourning. Is this your own idea, or would you align this kind of with the Buddhist tradition?
When I'm 80 years old, I don't know what I learned and what I came to myself.
Okay, right. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, and may you live to 120 and beyond. Moses lived to 120, so Jewishly we say 120. Aglaia, hi. Let's go to Aglaia, and then Matthew, and then Sarah, and then Ken, if we can get that far.
All right, I'll be short.
Oh, there you are. Great. Hi.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just be short. Okay, one, I'm kind of leaning towards what Janie's saying, actually, because of the fact that just my own experience with complicated grief, it was like constantly going through this cycle and everything, though, like over and over again and everything, though, trying to figure out. And the way that my brain works is that I'm trying to figure out how exactly I, caused this to happen, when logically they're so I lost someone. It doesn't have a logical, if you had done 20 push-ups a day, you wouldn't have lost this person. There's nothing like that and everything, though. So I'm kind of leaning towards what Janie's saying. Now, I can see it as a Buddhist sort of thing from kind of, I guess, going Jubu on everyone right now, though. But this idea that you're attached to things and so you feel like it's a personal, thing for you, when actually it isn't. It's just, the flow of life. People die, you lose people and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm kind of I don't know. I'm leaning more towards, leaning on Janie's side on the whole thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very nice. Thank you. Good. So both of you, I appreciate that reinforcement. Yeah, let's go to Matthew.
Okay. So what Janie said about people's own egos, triggered something when my mother died in 2015. One of the grandchildren decided to speak at the actual funeral, although other people had been chosen to speak because his ego was such that he had to feel important there. And it so aggravated all the children. And someone described it as the turning point in the relationship with his grandchild, who always sucked air and it was always about him. And I think what Janie said was very important. The other part was when my nephew died by suicide. Everyone came, it was the winter, and we were there because that's what you do. The siblings, my sister's child, we were all there. And it was about a year later that my sister realized how difficult it was. There was actually a snowstorm. My brother flew out of New York with his children to Detroit. The plane was diverted to Cleveland, and they rented a car and got there driving all night long to be there. And nothing was said. We said nothing other than we were there for her. And the contrast of the two situations, to this day, people are still annoyed. The cousins are all annoyed at this person. That his ego was such, as Jamie said, it wasn't about the people who were grieving. It was about, I'm so important, I have to speak. And just
good, Matthew. Thank you for that. So yeah, it's interesting.
And I hadn't thought about that for years until Jamie said that. That you go and you take the cue from others and you're quiet. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's, I mean, many dislike Moses's comment to his brother Aaron, telling him to be silent, right? Around the passing of his sons. But yeah, there is something around, if we're looking at this ego piece, to just embracing silence, and not centering oneself. And that can be very difficult. So yeah, thank you that. All three of you brought in a piece I hadn't thought about. Let's go Sarah, then Cheryl.
I'm going to throw a few pebbles in. One is having grown up without models of actual grieving and not understanding, because I didn't have good models. They went to Shiva sits. That's not it. I never saw my parents grieve for anyone, anything. And it didn't occur to me that that was work I have to do. And I certainly knew Kubler-Ross's work, but I didn't realize how much it applied to me. That, I would see it with my patients and their grief process as they were dying, but I really did not absorb not only my own grief with a loss, but as a physician, my own experience. And it's not something that really was addressed about any health professional. And the need to grieve multiple losses, much less the little losses in our lives, not even the real deaths, but deaths to our own expectations of ourselves and others. I'm complete.
Good. Sarah, thank you. Thank you. I want to comment, but I won't in the interest of time. Let's go to Cheryl. Cheryl gets the last comment here.
For a variety of reasons, people choose to have private burials. And then they say, well, there will be a celebration of life, which is a relatively new term in Judaism anyway. I've heard about it in other religions, and Christian and Catholic religions and things like that. But I think allowing the community, denying the community the right to participate in the ritual of the burial. A lot of times people choose their families to just a private ceremony. That's fine. But then I've experienced in the last few years when people have done that for whatever reason, either geographically, the burial is somewhere else, or for whatever reason, they say, well, we'll do something for the community, and then it never happens. And so it's kind of an incomplete, it's incomplete because it hasn't allowed other people who care about the deceased and care about the mourner, the intimate mourner, to express condolences or to feel grief with the family, with the person who has lost the other person. So that seems to be a newish thing, either that or I'm at the age where unfortunately there's more deaths and things like that. But and then the other thing is this whole celebration of life business. I heard a rabbi speak the other day about this, because he said we all celebrate when a baby is born, but the baby you should start worrying then. Of course we all do. And the worrying begins because you know that once the baby is born, they're on the journey and how it's going to end. But the celebration of life, there's always these big celebrations and festivities with when there's a newborn, a bris, or a naming, whatever. And then at the end, it's all darkness and sadness. And I think what he was saying is the celebration should come at the end. He was kind of being a proponent for this kind of celebration of life, because it's a life well lived, and we should celebrate the fact that the person lived and was successful, or had a life. So that was just my
Very
comment.
nice. Thank you so much. As always, I love hearing from you all. Very grateful. Next week, we're going to go to a whole different area, the psychology of economics. We're going to look at economics and tragedy of the commons, and shared resources, and distributions of wealth, and things like that as it relates to psychology and Torah. So everyone have a beautiful day. If you're not, everyone's invited to Mitch album, whether it is by Zoom or in person next week. And Rabbi Angela Bookdale is in less than a month, if you want to join us for that as well. She's also wonderful, and some other great things coming up. Have a beautiful day. Oh, and by the way, we need food. We need food. SNAP benefits are being cut, and we need food. Please help us get food. We ask everyone to give us food, because we have a Shalom pantry and we need lots of food to give people. Have a great day.